Hello, Podsmashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of Innovate
Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. We are your hosts,
Penguin and Termite,
and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together topics that you care about with video games. I am Termite.
and I am Penguin.
And tonight, we are going to talk about innovation.
I say innovation versus preservation.
Ooh,
is a way that
that's a fun title.
Yeah, I like it a lot. The question on our minds is, when should a franchise seek to innovate and change things versus when should a franchise try to keep the status quo and keep doing what they're doing well? This is a topic that was inspired by Borderlands 3, which I will get to when we decide to break it down, but I will say this was kind of a last-minute topic as well, because we had planned an interview that fell through, so we decided
Fell
to
through by whose fault?
No one's fault.
Okay.
Just life
Right.
circumstances.
I was going to say our fault. It was,
I mean, it
we
is our
didn't
fault.
do it.
Yeah, it was partially our fault. We
Yeah.
didn't get, we weren't ahead of it. We should have planned ahead of time. So we were last minute hitting someone up who had different plans, which is totally fine. So best of luck.
Indeed.
But yeah, so this was kind of, I wouldn't say it was cobbled together because it's been on my mind for a while as a topic, but it was not one that we pulled from our list. It was kind of a last minute one that I was like, hey, let's talk about this.
Let's do it.
Termite was cool enough to be like, let's do it.
I love it.
Cool.
So tonight we are drinking Sierra Nevada's 2019 Oktoberfest.
Yeah, we're getting in that fall mood because
A little bit, even though
despite the fact that it is butt hot outside.
it's ridiculous.
It was like 100 degrees outside today. I took my kid for a walk because I was working from home, and I was about to pass out. And to tell you, just to give you guys a insight into how awkward I am as a person, there was this young lady walking her dog out as well, and she was on her phone, just paying attention to her phone, and her dog kept lunging for my dog. But again, normal, it's fine, encountering other human beings out in the wild. But in this case, her route just happened to kind of line up with mine, so I kept running into her, and at one point, we were going to be walking in the same direction for a few minutes. So I decided to extend my walk even longer, just so I didn't have to do that. Because I'm because she seemed, she's fine, she was just paying attention on her phone, but her dog, I was just I don't want her to creep her out, so I'm just gonna inconvenience myself and go this other direction instead of weirdly kind of follow behind her for
stalker,
creepy 500 feet or something like that. Yeah. I'm just I don't want to come across like that. So I'm a dude with a dog and a baby. I'm probably the most approachable I'd ever be in any given circumstance, but I was just awkward, and I was I'm awkwarded out by human beings right now. Yeah.
Yep.
It's all good. Sorry, lady, if you end up listening to this podcast and, may recognize me because of the circumstance. If you happen to be a listener out there, sorry for the awkwardness. I was trying to be as not awkward as possible. But yes, the weather is supposed to change. That's all. It's supposed to change tomorrow. It's supposed to dip 20 degrees. Yeah. So it's going to go from 90, a high of 95 to 70 degrees, a high of 70, which is pretty sweet.
Hopefully it'll be awesome.
I really hope so. I'm so ready.
Oh, I'm sick of it.
I want this to just be the last little Klingon of summer, a little dingleberry of summer.
Yes,
and
that's
then
a good word for
let it drop.
Yeah, this sucks.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
what's going on?
This Oktoberfest,
Oktoberfest
was a collaboration with the Bitburger Brewery, and that might be a German word, so it's spelled Bitburger, but it can maybe not be.
That's probably the exact way it's pronounced, though,
cool.
in German.
It's
Bitburger.
I'm going to read the label. It's the ultimate season of revelry. So we teamed up with Germany's famed Bitburger Brewery for an Oktoberfest that turns backyards into beer gardens.
Ah, yes.
Rally your friends and celebrate with a fest beer whose rich amber color, secret hop blend, and smooth malty flavor bring the Munich tents to you.
Ooh, secret hop. That makes me...
Secrets.
I want to know the secret.
Secret.
I've got a secret. Do you know what I think of every time I think of secrets?
What's
I've
that?
probably mentioned this on the podcast before because we had a whole podcast about ism, things that you've picked up from games.
Uh-huh.
One of them that I've picked up, I picked it up from World of Warcraft. There was Vanilla WoW. There was a boss in one of the dungeons, Scarlet Monastery, and he was an inquisitor. And he was, his whole thing was that he would torture people to get their secrets. And so his line, whenever you engaged him in combat, he would go, "I'll rip the secrets from your flesh."
Oh, I do remember that. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
So every time you're like, "What's the secret hops?" I'm like, "We'll rip the secrets from your flesh."
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right.
I love the taste of this beer, by the way.
It's good.
It's a maltiness. It's an Oktoberfest. It's beer. It's awesome. It's just beer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good, but like Oktoberfest beers in particular, especially because they come out around the fall. And what's crazy is like October has nothing to do with the month of October.
Right.
The October of Oktoberfest.
Right.
It's not related, but it still is in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly how maybe it's just association, you know what I mean? But like, it's not pumpkin-y. It's not trying to be like spice or chai or anything the flavors we typically associate with fall. But it's just that maltiness. I just associate it with fall. It's really good.
It's not a brown ale. It's not an IPA. You know, doesn't have anything. It's got a good golden amber color and light body. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Good.
Good.
Sweet. Yes. Delicious.
Mm-hmm.
What is going on? There's so much going on.
We've been like, we're 5 minutes in already, and we haven't even gotten to all the news that we have to talk about. So let's like rapid fire talk about
boom.
We're not going to try to spend too much time on any of these.
You have to update us on Spider-Man.
I do.
He's back.
He's back
in the MCU.
My dreams have come true.
Yeah.
Spider-Man is after that huge discussion we had like about Spider-Man, where we spent like 15 minutes talking just about Spider-Man a few weeks ago. The newest news is that he's back in the MCU. They were able to strike a deal. The details of the deal, I've heard that like, I think it's still rumored. I don't think there's anything set because I don't think Sony came forward and talked about the like specifics of the deal. But the rumor is that Disney's getting 25% of the cut as opposed to the 50% that they wanted.
Okay.
Which is still much higher than it's still 5 times the 5% that they were getting.
Right. Yeah.
And the agreement is Kevin Feige will produce one more Spider-Man movie
in the MCU.
that will be part of the MCU, and it'll be the Spider-Man Homecoming 3.
Yep.
And the Spider-Man will show up in one more MCU movie, so something Avengers probably is what he'll show up in. But that's just the first, that's the short-term deal. Now that they're back on the table,
right?
They could come up with a future deal.
All right.
Supposedly, and this is just a rumor, but supposedly. Tom Holland was responsible for them coming back to the table.
I heard about
Apparently,
that.
he leveraged his casting as Nathan Drake.
Oh, really?
To get Sony to agree to it.
Ooh.
And then he personally called Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, to ask him to come back on the table.
Funny.
So he just like threw his weight around.
And this is
hard.
I don't want to get in. We're going to talk about Sony in a few at the end of our news. But the fact that Sean Layden was the head of the PlayStation Productions movie outlet with Nathan Drake.
Yeah.
And Uncharted. Like that's the only movie that we know about coming out of this new production that we talked about on the podcast too. And we also had like Sony Video Games. The company bought the rights exclusively for Insomniac, which made the Spider-Man video game and kept that in-house.
Tangled web.
It's all just like,
it's nuts.
What is going on?
Sony's
right
name
now
is coming up, whether it's Sony, the video game company, or Sony, the movie like branch.
Yeah.
That name is just popping up in the news all over the place. So
it's crazy.
For better or for worse, they keep coming up.
That's interesting. So he was trying to say he wouldn't be Nathan
I don't know
Drake,
if he said
maybe?
that, but I think he's just sort of said like...
This is all rumor and speculation, right?
It's all rumor and speculation. Part of the rumor is... as well as that they will, it's rumored that they're going to find a way to like introduce, they're already doing Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness or whatever. So part of what the theory, or not theory, but apparently there was some leak, take it for a grain of salt, but there was some leak where someone said that like, they're going to introduce the idea of a multiverse in Doctor Strange and then use that as a way of explaining, like it'll be in the Sony Spider-Man verse that like Venom is a part of.
Yeah.
Will be Tom Holland playing a different version of an alternate version of Peter Parker.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know. That could go really well or it could go really bad. I hope that they just make an agreement to fold all of the Spider-Man properties into the MCU because apparently, again, another rumor was that their plan was to have Norman Osborn be the bad guy for the next phase of MCU movies.
Okay.
But he's a Spider-Man. Property. So
interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like possibilities.
Yeah.
I just hope that they come back to the table and negotiate a longer term idea. Yeah, exactly.
Did you know Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was Sony produced, and it was very well received.
It
did very well for them.
So but it was also it was like the only Spider-Man. Well, not the only one, I should say. The original run of Tobey Maguire was pretty well received too. But It was the fact that it was animated means they took more liberties.
Oh yeah, sure.
They might not necessarily.
But you said multiverse, and it reminded me of that. And I was like, oh hey, look, Sony can do a good Spider-Man movie.
They can, yeah. All right, so that we'll stop there with that. And I wanted to talk about Gearbox.
They're in the highlight of some
more controversy. So on the one hand, they're being sued again. Apparently, the composer of Duke Nukem. Do you want to get into that?
I don't know his name. I don't remember the name because it's been this came out like last week. So yeah, the composer of music for the original Duke Nukem games was not asked about the 20th anniversary world tour, which is kind of a remake. This music, his name is where'd it go? Bobby Prince, sorry. He wrote music for Doom, Doom 2, Wolfenstein 3D, and Duke Nukem 3D. He filed a lawsuit against Gearbox Software, the company's chief executive, Randy Pitchford, and Valve, claiming that his music was used in the 2016 shooter Duke Nukem 3D 20th Anniversary World Tour without his permission and without him receiving any compensation. So, wow. Really?
Yeah. Gearbox, given Gearbox's history and Randy Pitchford's history, I'm not surprised at that at all. You know what I mean? Like, so
they did it. So there's a little bit of an explanation here. There's an article on PC Gamer about this, so you can go check it out if you want all of the gritty details. But Gearbox Software purchased the certain rights to Duke Nukem games from Apogee in 2010. Prince claimed the company went on to use his music in Duke Nukem 3D 20th Anniversary World Tour, which was the 2016 update to the shooter without his permission. Quote, the electronic files for the music within Duke Nukem 3D World Tour include text specifically stating that Mr. Prince owns the copyright to the music and has reserved all rights to the music's use, the court document read. Yet, Gearbox incorporated the music into the game without ever contacting Mr. Prince and without clearing the rights expressly mentioned in the electronic files. That's the only kind of bit for Dr. Prince's case, and I don't think we've heard back from Gearbox, their rebuttal or anything going on over there. We just know that they're now...
Their lawyers are a little backed up right now.
Yeah, exactly. So
I imagine, especially if it's explicitly in writing somewhere, I imagine they will either settle. They'll probably settle outside of court, honestly.
Probably.
Yeah. Speaking of settling, though, on the other hand, a little bit of good news for Gearbox is is that their former, months ago we talked about, before Borderlands 3 was even announced, we talked about how their former lawyer was suing them over some charges or claims of fraud. Mm-hmm. He has, as of this week, dropped those suits, and I believe they came to some kind of agreement, again, outside of court.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's Wade Callender was the former lawyer for Randy Pitchford. And there was the original claim was that Randy had embezzled or stolen a $12 million bonus that was supposed to be given to the customers of Gearbox.
To the employees.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry, employees, not customers. Yes, to the employees, it was supposed to be a $12 million bonus. The charges leveraged against Randy Pitchford were that he took them for himself, and there was also hints of underage sexual content on a USB drive. We try to stay family friendly on the podcast, and so those accusations had come out, and they've been in that war for a year now, and it's been back and forth and back and forth, and they finally came to an agreement to just not.
They're not pursuing. He is not pursuing the charges anymore. So I don't know what that means. Again, I don't know if they came to some kind of settlement. It wasn't specific. All I know is that he's dropping the suit. So that's some good news for them. Mm-hmm. I think that at least in regards to the fraud, which was the stronger of the two of the cases against them, there was exonerating evidence for Gearbox. So he probably was like, well, the rest of my stuff is weak AF, so I'll just drop the whole thing. It's probably, I imagine what happened, but I'm speculating at that point. So
cool. And there's a write-up on Kotaku about that we got the news from. So go check that out.
All right, last little thing before we spend a little bit more time on news.
Yes, there's a huge write-up of Pokemon Sword and Shield in the newest issue of Game Informer that should be going out now. I am anxiously awaiting, eagerly, not anxiously, because eagerly is the positive context of that. Eagerly awaiting my Game Informer issue so I can devour this article, so I'm trying to stay away from the spoilers of what this article is revealing. However, there is a quote from Masuda, who is one of the head directors, producers of Pokemon Sword. There was this whole controversy over the National Pokedex, Pokemon included in the games leading up to this point, not all being in Pokemon Sword and Shield. So the National Pokedex would not be complete with all 900 plus Pokemon. It would be cut short. And his response to that was, will these Pokemon be added later? And he said, definitely, you can look forward to seeing Pokemon that don't appear in these games appearing in different regions in future games. I think Pokemon Home, for a lot of players, will serve as a launching pad to gather them all there and then embark on future adventures.
So he's basically saying, like, yeah, some of those cut Pokemon are going to be in future games. I feel like that's not exactly what people wanted, and neither is that necessarily a bomb. Like, I mean, people would have expected, okay, yes, so they're just going to be doing regional Pokedexes from here on out instead of having the national Pokedex in.
But it sounds like there's a new Pokemon Home landing spot. So right now we have Pokemon Bank, where you could have taken all of your Pokemon from the DS and 3DS games and hang them out there, along with Pokemon Go and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. Now there's going to be this new Pokemon Home, starting with the Galar region, which is Sword and Shield. Yeah. And it sounds like the old Pokemon, the retro, quote-unquote, Pokemon, are going to be brought forward in newer games, the next generation of, so whatever's after Sword and Shield, they're going to go back and grab old Pokemon and put them in there, so that way you can take your Sword and Shield Pokemon plus the next generation that will include everything, and eventually we'll get to the 1200.
Sure.
Or, it's a number thrown out there.
I understand, but it's also just not necessarily what people are wanting.
Right, people want all the Pokemon now.
In one game, yeah. But, there is understandably, like, there's just too many Pokemon. There's just too many.
Yeah, there's a million... I could go into an entire episode of a podcast about why, what we think about with too many Pokemon, it's gotten too big, it's ballooned too much, and this is a great way to, like, draw the chalk line and say, nope, we're just going to have these, and you go into the esports ideas and Pokemon battles and trading and all those things. And
remind me to come back to Pokemon, because this brings up a point that ties in well with our episodes.
So whether you're on the fence for or against Pokemon Sword and Shield, just know that if you are you're aggravated about the idea of not getting your old Pokemon into now games, the current generation, you will in the future.
Yeah. Cool. All right. And then now you want to talk a little bit more about Shawn Layden leaving.
Yes, this is a huge bit of news. So Shawn Layden, he is the chairman, of Sony Worldwide Studios, just tweeted, the following from PlayStation came out. This is what the tweet said, and this is the only bit of news that we got. There's no press release, no explanation, and no succession plan.
Yeah.
No one's taken his spot. It is with great emotion that we announce that Worldwide Studios chairman Shawn Layden will be departing Sony Interactive Entertainment. His visionary leadership will be greatly missed. We wish him success in the future endeavors. That was my fault. And are deeply grateful for his years of service. Thanks for everything, Shawn. So there's so much to unpack here. So first off, people who listen to us might not know who Shawn Layden is or what Sony Worldwide Studios is. So Layden took charge of Sony Interactive Entertainment America in 2014 following the departure of the former president and CEO, Jack Tretton. Jack Tretton was the face of PlayStation back when the PS3 was announced. He was the one who infamously was saying, essentially, you'll buy it because it's us and we're awesome. So he's the infamous Jack Tretton, Jackie T. In 2016, he became, this is Shawn Layden, the chairman of Sony's Worldwide Studios. This is where things get a little confusing, there was a rebranding of Sony Interactive Entertainment. Sony Interactive Entertainment was a merger of Sony Computer Entertainment and Sony Network Entertainment. So there was two entities that were wrapped up together into the new Sony Interactive Entertainment.
Okay, right? And then Shawn Layden was given head over that.
Kind of. This is because Sony's Worldwide Studios is yet another entity. There's two major entities now. There were going to be three. So two were rolled up into Sony Interactive Entertainment, and then now there's Sony Worldwide Studios. Okay? A little confusing, but there's two big organizations. Okay. So in his time as chairman of Worldwide Studios, Layden has overseen PlayStation's golden period, with multiple Game of the Year winners and nominees, including Marvel's Spider-Man. Layden was the face of the deal that brought Insomniac Games into Sony, the first-party studio family, which I just talked about with Spider-Man earlier tonight, which finalized in August 2019, and the person who greenlit the project. In the days following his departure, Sony has made some significant changes that they've kind of been against in the past, and we'll get there in a second, but I still want to talk about... So there's this guy named Jim Ryan. He's the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, and then there's this other guy who I'm still trying to figure out who this guy is and what his role is, Kadera. And there was kind of a power struggle when Worldwide Studios was launched. Shawn Layden was put into power there, and that job almost seemed created just for Layden, because there was a little bit of a power struggle from when Shawn Layden was CEO after Jackie Trenton and Jim Ryan was coming up, and that did that merger that I talked about earlier. So there's all of these executive powers at play. Apparently, this is all, now we're into rumor and speculation. Jim Ryan and Sean Layden never saw eye to eye. Sean Layden was pushing for single-player experiences, which is why we got all of these crazy good God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, all of those things under Sean Layden's run. And now Jim Ryan, he's more of a servicey, streaming, Destiny-oriented games as a service kind of guy, looking ahead, monetization, those types of things. And so in 2 or 3 years from now, Sean Layden's gone. So what does that mean?
Oh, that makes me worried.
There's no succession for the Sony Worldwide Studios because that position was created for Sean Layden. So nuts. And you mentioned earlier, and I want to highlight this, that the trifecta, the three-headed dragon, was Phil Spencer, Reggie Fils-Aimé from Nintendo, Phil Spencer from Xbox, and Sean Layden from Sony. Yeah. They were the three like faces to the public consumer of who these companies are. Well,
they all got up and did some big thing about solidarity during E3 that everybody thought was going to be.
I thought it was Game Awards. Was it E3?
It might have been Game Awards. You're right. It was Game Awards because E3 would have been after Reggie's departure. So, so it was Game Awards last year. That everyone was like, oh, is it going to be an announcement about crossplay? It wasn't, but it was just an announcement of solidarity, which is fine.
Crossplay's in the news now too. We'll get there. There's a lot to talk about here.
But so that's so it's interesting that two of those heads are gone. Yeah,
Reggie's departure, announcement of retirement.
Yep.
Nintendo announced through press releases exactly what was going to happen, who's going to take a spot. Everything was cordial and framed. This is just boom on Twitter. Like, no more Sean. He's gone. Like, well, I just alluded to earlier, he's also the head of PlayStation Productions, the whole movie wing. Now, what happens there? No one knows. Yeah. It's all crazy, right? So, speaking of crossplay, and also speaking of, there's these things that Sony's kind of been bucking against the trend. And those things are PlayStation Now was an overly expensive, not a very good quality product because the streaming has been like meh. And there have been like murmurs and announcements about how they're going to emphasize PS Now and they're going to like increase its audience. And this is kind of the new initiative going into the PlayStation 5 era that we're going to like bolster PlayStation Now. Well, right around this time that Sean Layden's tweet went out that he was leaving, it wasn't even his tweet, it was PlayStation's tweet. We saw a cut in half of PlayStation Now's price.
Yep, it's now $9.99. So and they added Netflix, the price less than a Netflix subscription, you can get access to a library of games to stream off of.
That was only half the big news. The other half of that big news, Grand Theft Auto 5 is on it.
And God of War and other games that I actually care about.
But Grand Theft Auto 5 is a Rockstar game that has never been available on any streaming service yet. And it is still charting as the top-selling video game in the top 5 since 2016 when that game came out, right? So apparently there was a huge deal. Rockstar made some money on getting or on selling that ability to have so that happened, and I'm wondering if that was Jim Ryan.
Sounds like a Jim Ryan.
Like once Sean's done, like now he can do that move, right? That's a power move there. Also, the new openness to the implementation of crossplay. We're no longer in the crossplay beta. It was announced that Sony is now supporting crossplay, and that everything that developers need is in place. So it's all in the developers' hands now.
Sweet.
So that opens the floodgate, right? That's awesome. So that's also something new that popped up.
Yeah.
That it seems like, okay, Sean's out of the picture, or who knows what's going on behind the scenes, but it really does seem like the moment Sean's out of the picture, here we're getting these huge news about PlayStation Now and crossplay and the addition of big first-party exclusives in PlayStation Now, which weren't in there before because Sean was in control of those big first-party exclusives. It's just interesting. All of this is a huge conversation that's just like all inside baseball within Sony, and we don't know what's going on. And there's massive implications for PS5 and what it looks like with the generation switch and all that. It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
As a result of that giant, complicated amount of news that we just laid on our listeners, I think we're gonna have to skip our other segments and go right into our main topic.
Oh yeah,
we're at like 25 right now, so we're gonna have to probably skip. So apologies to fans of favorite things and DLC. We are skipping those, but we'll do the songs and stuff for you if you still want.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
DLC.
DLC.
So our favorite thing this week is going right into our main topic.
Yes.
As is our TLC for the night. So apologies to those fans. There was so much news we had to get through. And, we could continue to unpack that Sean Layden thing.
Yeah.
All night. We don't want to, maybe we'll save it for another topic. I don't know, but we're going to go ahead and move on to our main topic. But, it is a big deal. Huge deal. I'm interested to see what the shakeups are. I'm interested to see if they'll shine more light on what's going on, too.
I think once they get their story together.
Yeah.
It's just PR scramble right now. It's like, holy crap, what happened?
The way that this has shaken out seems to be almost like, I almost wonder if they got trigger happy in pulling the tweet in the first place. You know what I mean? Because you're right. Typically, this is something that would be handled very delicately the way Nintendo did, where it's like, yeah, we're saying goodbye to this person, but don't worry, here's this other person, and here's this cute video with Bowser the character.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, they handled it very well, whereas this seems to be...
And the tweet was cordial, too.
Oh, yeah.
There wasn't any, malicious,
but it has to be.
I mean, it's 2019, so, Me Too, etc. Like, what did Sean Layden do? Well, obviously, that's not the case, because they were very cordial, and they weren't trying to distance themselves. It was a very... crazy.
Yeah. Anyway, so again, we can unpack it, but it is still a very interesting piece of news that I thought was worth cutting our other segments for. So, all right, cool. Well, what are we talking about tonight? We are talking about innovation versus preservation, and when should a franchise innovate, basically. So, I'll kind of preamble by saying this is kind of inspired by Borderlands 3 because it was one of the big discussions around Borderlands 3 before it came out. And shortly after it was released.
Yep.
On the one hand, you had game journalists who played it, maybe never having played a Borderlands game before, and saying, or maybe having, they played Borderlands 2 or whatever, and they're like, oh, why isn't this game changed? Why is this game still the same way it was?
Yep.
It was 7 years ago when Borderlands 2 came out. Why is this franchise not adapted and did something new? On the other hand, you had a lot of the fans saying, this is what we want. We want just more Borderlands, and that's fine. So we're going to break that down, and not just we're not going to focus just on Borderlands 3, but we're going to break it down because you see this conversation keep popping back up in the industry, which is when should a franchise take risks and innovate and try something new versus when should they hold their cards close to their chest and just make a game, another entry in a game that people want.
Yep.
And what are the pros and cons of both? Because what we'll find is you'll have one journalist slam a game for not innovating, and you'll have another journalist slam a game for innovating too much and changing things. So it's almost like you can't, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
We won't have a clear answer either.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
This is a very subjective topic.
It's very subjective, and it's going to be very, and you'll hear from both of us, not only, you'll probably hear us disagree, but you're also probably going to hear us both be like, yeah, I don't really know what the answer is. So again, it's very much it'll be a discussion. So I think it'll be interesting. So, let's start with, we're going to focus in first on innovation and say, what does it mean for a game franchise to innovate? And then we'll go immediately into talking about what are the downsides and drawbacks of innovation, how can innovation go very wrong? So start there. What does it mean to innovate?
And innovation is when you drastically change your franchise to adapt to a modern paradigm. And a more recent, very popular...
Or to completely do something completely new, something completely different that hasn't been seen in any game before.
Right. And the reason why I use the word paradigm is because usually there's been a different type of game from a different company entirely that did really, really well.
Yeah.
But it was an entirely different game, and then they take an existing franchise and kind of morph it to that. We have God of War as an example.
I would say Skyrim, the games that have both that have I would say the two most influential, three most influential games of the 2010 era that have caused other games to try to catch up. Have been Dark Souls. Skyrim. And Fortnite, or no, I should say PUBG in that regard. Because
for battle royales.
Three, battle royales came out of it. Dark Souls, someone described Jedi the Fallen Order's combat as Dark Souls-esque, and I realized, I was like, no, it's God of War-esque, and then I realized, oh wait, no, technically God of War's combat style is Dark Souls-esque.
Yep, exactly.
And then Skyrim for the open world stuff.
It's the perfect example of what I was talking about. So those three games came out, saw massive critical and financial success, and the makers of God of War, Santa Monica Studios, were interested in making a new entry in Kratos' life and thought, well, everything we've done in the past is not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Those types of games don't sell or do well. So let's innovate. Let's think about what's out there, what makes money, what do people want.
Yep.
And they look and see these open world flavors and these really technical, difficult combat situations, very intentional combat systems. And they're like, okay, that works. Let's roll that in. And they can see, and now we got the God of War, quote, 4, which, has been rebranded and rebooted as God of War.
And if we're talking about God of War,
that's innovation.
We also have to talk about Breath of the Wild because we can't contractually not talk about Breath of the Wild.
Contractually. We are obligated to speak of Breath of the Wild, World of Warcraft, and God of War in every episode.
Every single one.
Even Podsmash.
At least one of them in every episode. Yeah.
Yes.
But preferably multiple ones. Breath of the Wild 2 did the same kind of thing with Zelda, taking this long-standing franchise that has existed almost as long as video gaming has, and taking elements from the aforementioned Skyrim and including them and innovating, changing the structure of the franchise.
Entirely.
What's important to talk about, and actually we'll go ahead and say what are the drawbacks. What's important with innovation and what is risky with innovation is, and this particular criticism does not apply to the games we just talked about, but the fear is like what happens to the game's identity. Like the loss of identity is a huge fear that both Zelda and God of War were able to sidestep, or not sidestep, but find a way to preserve the identity of the game while completely drastically changing the way the game is played. And I think both of them did that well, but I can imagine there are examples of games that did not do that well. They felt like entirely different games. This no longer feels like this game that I love. That's a huge fear. Probably the primary fear of, and drawback of innovation.
I am racking my brain trying to think of a video game franchise that innovated to failure. Like a successful franchise that was doing well, and then they failed at innovating and plummeted.
Yeah, you're right. Now that I'm like the lights are on, the mics are on, and I'm thinking about it too. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't think of it, but they're out there. I know they are because there's
on the hardware side. It's easy. The Wii U, like that was a complete commercial failure entirely, and that was a failure to innovate correctly. From the original Wii by adding a tablet. That's a great example of Nintendo doing something, but that's not really a video game franchise. That's Nintendo as a company with hardware trying to innovate and did not work.
Yeah, well, we're a little far away from doing examples anyways, so maybe we'll give you some time to think and look into it real quick.
Yep.
I would say another big drawback of innovation is this sort of idea of chasing trends, where it's like, oh, are you innovating because it's the best? Are you making a change because it's the best choice for this game? Or are you just trying to chase a trend? Are you just trying to make money, trying to, a good example of that would be like every game trying to add loot boxes into their game, whether it makes sense or not.
Yep. Like
Shadow of War, why are you adding loot boxes in Shadow of War? You're doing it because it's a money thing and because it's trendy. It's like, that's not necessary.
Nope.
You know what I mean? Like you're adding nothing to the game by adding this to it. So it's, in the spirit of game design, innovation can be dangerous because what you're saying is like, or what you're attempting to do is, let's introduce new elements just because that's popular, as opposed to let's introduce new elements because it actually serves the design of the game.
Right.
Yeah.
So. And popularity versus monetization are kind of weird in and of themselves. And the reason why loot boxes were added to those games were to help pay for the cost.
Sure.
Increased cost of developing games. And that's kind of a different topic. But it's still relevant because they're shoehorning in new innovative things that are like from the mobile gaming sphere into our AAA games. Yeah. And
yeah, those things are still innovations, whether they're, again, an innovation can be good or bad. Innovation is just a word for something new. Some people, we have tried to use the most positive words possible because when I was trying to, the opposite of innovation, like I kept thinking in my mind, kept wanting to say stagnation.
Yeah.
But that's like, I think preservation is a better word because it's not necessarily bad thing. But people always say the word innovation as if it's like the best thing possible. But no, innovations can be bad too.
Yep.
Loot boxes are incredibly innovative. They're incredibly smart too. Yep. They're just not great. People don't like them, you know what I mean? And they're not positive things. Right. So, there are things about games as a service, every game trying to chase that games. I haven't really seen games as a service really transform an existing franchise, except for maybe like Shadow of War. No, not Shadow of War. I'm sorry. Shadow of the Tomb Raider.
Oh, really?
Was billed as a games as a service game.
Oh, interesting.
And supposedly, I don't know if they have though. Like they were supposed to be releasing all these like seasonal DLC content drops that you paid a season pass for, and that in that way it was a games as a service.
Yeah.
but I don't know how that ended up turning out. It was an okay game, the base game, but I would never buy a season pass for it or try to take advantage of games as a service aspects of it. Anyways, I digress. Do you have any other thoughts about drawbacks and downsides of innovation or trying to innovate an existing franchise?
Yeah, I mean, it has, like, echoing more what you said, it has to be done smartly. I think a good example of innovations that aren't as abrupt would be like the Assassin's Creed franchise. I think what they've done from Assassin's Creed 3 to Black Flag to now we have Odyssey and Exodus. Those
then gradual, introducing a new element each time.
Yep. And Exodus was the first one. It was set in Egypt, and it had RPG elements where you have equip gear and you level up and gain experience, and you have kind of an open world experience. Which Assassin's Creed has always been open world, but now these open worlds have different level enemies that require you to level up and
so lots of RPG
do quests. Yeah. And so that's a crazy innovation. That was the one between them were Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag, and
if you were to make the jump of Assassin's Creed 1 to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the differences would be much starker, but because there have been 15 games between now and then, it's been gradual over time.
And so that was an example of a smartly done innovation, changing it just enough to be fresh,
or it's
but still
a
familiar.
strategy. I mean, but then you see God of War 1, 2, and 3 are virtually identical, with very little changes, and then the jump from 3 to 4 is very abrupt and almost comparable to the jump from Assassin's Creed 1 to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But they were able to do it all at once, and sometimes that has to do, we can talk about strategies, ways in which innovation can be done smartly versus dumbly, but there's two contrasting strategies there, and in both cases they worked. But so it's interesting to see.
The biggest downfall or downside, I can't talk. The biggest downside of innovation is risk.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, you risk alienating your fans, but I think we might find the same thing is true.
High risk, high
with
reward.
Preservation. So it's just a different kind of risk.
Yeah.
Anyways, so let's use that as a segue to talk about preservation. What does it mean to preserve a game? And what is the risk of preservation becoming stagnation, as I mentioned before?
Yeah, so preservation is when a new entry comes out, when you get Halo 3, and it looks just like Halo 1 and 2, but it's prettier, a little bit bigger, but it's still basically the same thing.
Right, it's almost like more content to an existing game. Don't fix what ain't broken, if that's what's the old adage there.
And then Halo 4, and then Halo 5. And now you have 5 Halo games that are essentially the same linear first-person shooter storytelling. Each one has its own flavors, nuances, goods and bads.
They have new multiplayers with new weapons and stuff like that, but the essential bones of the game is still the same.
Exactly the same. That's preservation.
Yeah, that's preservation. Exactly. Yep. And what are the downsides? What are the potential drawbacks of preservation?
It's the same feeling. I'm doing the same thing I've been doing.
Yeah.
So this isn't as fun as it used to be.
Right.
I'm getting tired of it. So I'm getting bored.
Yeah, I think you also risk carrying over the weaknesses. And, again, what happens in the gaming industry, especially as more and more developers take risks and innovate, is, for every bad innovation, there's going to be an incredible innovation. Right. And when you've been exposed to that, if it's in any way similar to any game you've played before, all of a sudden those other games, you're like, why is this game still doing this? Yep. And I think, again, this is where I brought up the idea of Borderlands.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's great about there's a lot that I love about Borderlands 3. Again, I will never completely trash Borderlands 3 on this podcast because I have been having a blast with it one way or another.
Yeah.
A lot of what I love about it is it's still a Borderlands game, and that makes me happy.
Yeah.
It has carried over some significant flaws and weaknesses of its predecessors. One of the big things, and it's actually in a lot of ways, it's gone a step back from even Borderlands 2. There's a lot of ways in which it's even worse than Borderlands 2. And I'm not talking about things like performance issues. Performance issues are performance issues. They're fixable.
Yeah.
They're either fixable by getting the upgraded version for the PS5, you know what I mean?
Right.
Not necessarily the way
Throw
I want to go.
at it. Yeah.
But exactly. Those things are fixable. No, it's design flaws, such as why are there some bosses that have fast travel points right in front of the boss, and other bosses that you have to walk all the way go through the gauntlet just to get to them?
Yeah.
Especially when, unlike Borderlands 2, there's no fixed loot tables on the bosses. Meaning in Borderlands 2, if I wanted to get X gun, I went and farmed Y boss.
Yeah.
In Borderlands 3, there are a few items like that, but most of the legendaries in the game are you could get them from anything. You could get them from a dinosaur that you killed on the street. You could get them from the final boss of the game. The bosses are just more likely to drop them. Mm-hmm. But what that means is instead of being able to target and go, instead of it being like, oh, it's worth it to go after this boss, run through the gauntlet to go to this boss.
Yeah.
Like, instead now you just have to farm the most efficient boss. And the ones that are the most efficient are the ones that have the fast travel points right next to them. And
how about that?
Little ammo stations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What that means is there's less fun things to do in the game, because if you're just going to sit there and for hours farm the same boss, someone bragged about farming this. There's like a tree boss that you fight at the end of Eden. Yeah. So that's the boss people are just farming over and over and over and over and over and over again. You're doing one thing just to get the items you want in the game. As opposed to in Borderlands 2, you had all these different bosses you could go after. So this was something that was introduced in Borderlands pre-sequel.
Yeah.
It was the open loot tables.
I got you.
And that's carried over now. But they haven't innovated. They haven't even done the same thing they did in a previous entry of the franchise.
Yeah.
They just did the thing they did the last time, and it sucks. You know what I mean? So that's just one example. Things like menus.
Oh, the UIs are trash.
Why? Yeah. Why?
They're horrible.
Why can't you do things like we've seen in other games, you can pull up like things while the gameplay's still going. You don't have to go fully into a menu and pause the game to do things like adjust your, like add a skill point to things. Right. You could easily do that in like a pop-up UI and stuff like that. Like there's so many things that like other games have shown are possible. Small design quality of life choices that they're just like, nope, that's not Borderlands enough apparently.
Yeah.
There's nothing like none of those things could be things that would sacrifice the identity of Borderlands. They're just nice, fun, cool things. Like, why can't you just queue up for like? Why do you have to like exit out of the game to respawn things? Yeah. Why can't you just go back to the fast travel point and have things respawn so that you're still in the same game as opposed to having to completely unload and reload? You know what I mean? Like it's design choices that are carryover. And so again, I don't want to rant about Borderlands 3 the rest of the night. I just want to say it's an example of the game is stagnating because they're not innovating and trying to update. Again, you don't have to go full bore and like we are now copying Destiny.
Right.
You don't have to do that. That is one example of too far into the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But the other extreme is like, no, please don't just remake Borderlands 2 because Borderlands 2 had some serious design issues. Yep. But that was okay because at the time there was still nothing like it.
Right.
We have seen other. That's my point about like. What innovation brings to the table is, hey, this is a better thing.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find those good golden nuggets and include them in games, especially similar games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A good UI that would fit is like Horizon Zero Dawn's UI.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You just bring it up, you have maps.
Slows down the action for a hot second while you switch guns. Oh my gosh, can you imagine?
Yeah. That'd be awesome. But of course, Horizon Zero Dawn single player, Borderlands 3 is kind of open to anyone jumping in your game at any time. Sure. And so you have that. But
there's still things they can do. Yeah. There's still
what drives me crazy is if you bring up your list of things in the world, you can't fast travel, even though you can highlight the fast travel point. The X that says fast travel is surrounded by a white circle, and you can't use it unless you press left on the D-pad to go back to the list of fast travel
things
points.
Like they added so
why?
People complain that you couldn't more easily switch between missions.
Yep.
And so what they added was a nice little like you can now cycle through the missions
on your D-pad.
Yep. The problem is you can't do that same thing while you're looking at your map.
Right.
So it's like why didn't you have an easy way of cycling through the missions on the map instead of, because that's what people are going to do. They're going to be like, okay, which missions can I hit in this area and be really efficient? Yep. So it's almost completely, I changed my button scheme to just throw that out because I'm like, this is not helpful for me because I would rather have that functionality on the map as opposed to.
This is great examples of bad preservation.
Yeah, exactly. Like preserving features of the game or parts of the game that are not worth preserving,
which is an interesting topic because that's why we're talking about it tonight, because the fact that Borderlands 3 as a whole is preservation-esque
is good,
right? Is good. It's a looter shooter, however you want to say it.
I do wish they had taken a little bit more pizzazz with the guns. They did like some really cool things with the guns, and then also, but most of the legendaries are still just like they do some minor little thing as opposed to I want like sheep. I want sheep storms.
Like stupid stuff.
I have a legendary that's a Tediore gun that's like ice based. And so it does the ice damage, the cryo damage.
Yeah.
And then like, Tediore, you're supposed to be able to throw it and it's supposed to have a cool effect, right?
Right.
All it does is split into like 3 other ones and they run, and I'm like, that was a total like opportunity for like a snowstorm. Like you throw the Tediore gun and it explodes into a snowstorm.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
Simple things like that. That's like, it doesn't take too much thought to come up with like cool legendary ideas, but many of the legendaries are just carryovers from like oh, it's the same B word. There's like a gun called the B word.
Yeah.
That's not B word. I'm censoring myself.
Censoring,
yeah. It's a gun that's existed in the game since the first one.
Oh, really?
And that's like, okay, cool, but why do you have every single gun? Like, they also have Maggie, and they also have the Infinity Pistol, and they also have all these guns that are cool guns, but still kind of basic in regards to, so it's like, you filled up your legendary pool with all these existing guns instead of like keeping a few fan favorites and adding a bunch of new, more interesting ones.
Another example of bad preservation.
Exactly, yeah. So which is disappointing because the entire game is about the loot.
Yeah.
So why did you not emphasize more innovation with the loot?
Right.
That's so frustrating. Anyways.
But the good aspects of its preservation are the gunplay, the gameplay. Sure. It feels good. It's hilarious, irreverent humor. Like, I mean, other
stories, games, and there's so many other games where the preservation has like turned out well. In fact, we mentioned Zelda, the Zelda franchise.
Yep.
The Zelda franchise survived just fine preserving its gameplay.
Oh, they've done Zelda is its own little thing because they've done both innovate and preserve.
They've done both over the course. It's like they have that perfect balance of like we're gonna like Breath of the Wild's formula could and should be preserved for at least another 10 years.
Right.
Every Zelda game, for the most part, going forward, should like
do that,
and then maybe in 2030 or maybe near the end of the 2020s, we see them make another jump. You know what I mean? But that's that's a good formula where you're like, so answering when should a game innovate after a few years of successful, like that's an answer to that question. Like when you've hit a successful formula and then done that formula for a while enough, like, cause people weren't really getting sick of Zelda's formula until like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword. That's when you started to hear mumblings of people being like, they should try something different. And then they were like, cool, we're going to do that next with the next one.
Yeah.
So, that's,
and they've nailed it. It's awesome.
Mario's gameplay for the most part has been, and most of the Mario spin-offs too, like Mario Kart, Smash Bros, like Nintendo are the kings of coming up with a winning formula and sticking with it and to success. And nobody complains about it for the most part.
And when Mario Odyssey was announced, they said this is in the line of Mario that we haven't made a game in a while. And that's Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. And now you have Mario Odyssey. And that's it. But then you have this whole like Mario 3D World, and then you have the new Super Mario side-scrolling games, which are a legacy of the NES games. And so like you have 3 different major jumps in the Mario world.
And you've seen that with Zelda too.
Right.
The 2D top-down Zeldas. Yep. I think of Metroid too. Like you've got, not Metroid 2, but I think of Metroid as well.
Yeah.
You've got like, there's the side-scrolling Metroidvania Metroids, and then there's Metroid Prime, where it's like, here is our big innovation making Metroid, but we're still, we've branched off, and now the Metroid franchise doesn't have to be beholden to one.
Yeah, they have entries for all kinds of different ways.
Exactly, and that's what Nintendo's great at.
Nintendo the king of innovation.
Yeah, they're the king of innovation, both innovation and preservation, though. You know what I mean? Like, they do both. They sit there and they look at their franchises as like, these can be whatever we want them to be. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like and that's what they've done with their Mario franchise. You want a Mario tennis game? Cool. We'll make it. You want a Mario racing game? Cool. You want a Mario fighting game? Cool. Like, we'll make those games and still like, but just the existence of that jumping into a new franchise or a new direction for the franchise doesn't invalidate their existence. So I almost wish more franchises would like be fine with doing that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it would be cool to see another God of War game in the vein of the old God of War games. Like, they don't have to. If they choose to do it, if they choose to continue in the line of God of War 4, I'm fine with that. But if they were to be like, hey, we're releasing this God of War for like a cheaper price, and it's going to be, but it's a whole new adventure, like a prequel Kratos adventure from before God of War 1 or whatever. Yeah, it'd be perfectly fine game.
It would.
Depends on how the fans would receive it, I guess. Yeah. So, cool. Well, so we have already, I guess, talked about examples of, this, but let's go to focus on, see if we can do like a lightning round of what are examples of each. So we're gonna look at successful ones and failures. So what are franchises that have innovated successfully? We've already talked about some of those. What are innovation or franchises that have preserved successfully? Let's talk about those. I guess, have we talked about all of them?
Not a whole lot. Preserved successfully, Uncharted. All 5 Uncharted games.
Yeah.
And Lost Legacy is kind of a 0.5. So really 4.5 games have all been the same basic formula. Third person, platforming, shooting. Yeah. Quick time events.
I think Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry is another good
example. Is a good example of one that's preserved successfly.
Yep. Mega Man.
Resident Evil is an example of one that has innovated very well because Resident Evil, I mean, you can see that just in the difference of Resident Evil 2 and the Resident Evil 2 remake.
Yeah.
You know, so...
they had some growing pains because Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 were kind of the same.
Yeah.
And 4 they innovated to the third person was accepted with great critical acclaim. Amazing. And then 5 came out. That was kind of iffy. 6 bombed. Was terrible.
Was it bomb?
And then they innovated again in an entirely different direction with 7.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
so it's
Resident
been up
Evil
and down.
2.
So that's a great example of ones that have innovated poorly.
Yep.
Final Fantasy, I think, as a franchise,
you can't
has had both good and awful innovations.
Yep.
If you look at all of their like weird side games like Type O or whatever, and even like a Crisis Core. Crisis Core, I think story was really cool from what I saw of it.
Yep.
But the gameplay looked wacky and crazy.
I never played it.
There are.
Final Fantasy 15 is another example of them innovating, taking aspects of Western RPGs like Skyrim, Fallout, etc., and rolling them into the Final Fantasy formula, which was received mixed,
right?
Not very great, but yet somewhat okay.
Yeah, well, you think of like 11, where it's like
that's an MMO.
Exactly,
so
they completely tried to innovate and then failed, and then they did it again with 14 and failed, and then they had to remake 14 Realm Reborn, and now it's super successful. So it's like there are examples of these. You had said that you had a hard time finding ones that when does innovation backfire? Those are examples.
Well, I mean,
so
a
franchise can recover from bad innovation.
Yeah.
But doesn't change the fact that the innovations themselves at the times were bad. So, all right, cool. Yeah, let's move on from examples. Let's sort of talk more high. Let's zoom back out and talk
higher level.
Yeah. Why is it important for developers to learn from other franchises? So here's and then why might developers willfully ignore the lessons learned from other franchises? So we see this phenomenon with things like we talked about this with Anthem.
Yeah, they never paid attention to Destiny ever.
Yeah,
it was so surprising.
Even Borderlands 3, you can sit there and be like, why did you not learn? Even from your own previous successes, like Borderlands 2, like why haven't you learned from your own history? Why haven't you looked at Diablo? Why haven't you looked to Destiny? All this stuff to pull the good nuggets from it.
Yeah.
So why is it important that developers learn from other franchises?
We just talked about it. They need to learn from other franchises because they can learn from their successes and the things that people love about them.
I think it's most important to learn from other franchises' mistakes. What is a decision that they made that was received super poorly, forcing them to change it?
Yeah.
The Diablo 3 auction house is a great example, but like their original loot where it was like completely 100% randomized stats was awful. So it's like they had to change their loot up. And, Diablo learned, and they publicly, they went out and they had their loot guy, their loot designer actually, wrote up a blog and was like, the lesson we learned was that you shower your people with the best loot, or you shower your people with the highest quality loot, but make it the best of the best. The creme de la creme is the rare.
Yeah.
The best, highest roll. You get them searching for that perfect roll, but in the meantime, you give them the dopamine rush of seeing that orange color that everybody's seeking after, you know what I mean?
Yep.
They learned that, people should look to World of Warcraft for its successes and failures because it's a franchise that has existed for
I think that
decades.
Single-handedly changed the MMO world. So people have looked at World of Warcraft.
Yeah, exactly. And so, exactly what you're saying. When developers look and learn, so, Zelda, when the Zelda developers said, hey, Skyrim did this really well, but let's not do this mistake that Skyrim made. Let's make a really high quality, high polished, well tested game.
Yep.
Let's not overwhelm our players with choices, but give them the freedom to actually do interesting things with the tools we give them. And then, they made one of the most successful open world games of the last decade.
Yep.
And so it's but they had to look and learn from both the mistakes and the failures of Skyrim to make that. So
and other ones, other Western RPGs too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really important that developers look and learn, because when they don't,
and I'm so surprised they don't. When I heard that account about Anthem, and they're like, "Yeah, we're just kind of focused on what we're doing," and that's not the only one.
No,
because there's things like I remember Rockstar articles about Red Dead Redemption 2, and they just focus on what they're doing, and there's complaints with Red Dead, quality of life stuff they could have done or whatever, and they were questioned, like, why didn't you do that like this game? I don't remember the details, but they're essentially like, well, we're just so focused on developing our own game that we don't really like look out at what other people are doing. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why not?
And not to beat and this is to answer the question, because not to beat not actually dead horse, but beat a well-beaten horse. Borderlands, like, yeah, I think that, like, they may look and say, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, we shouldn't do this because it's received so poorly, or because we don't want to come across as chasing trends.
Yeah.
Anthem, in that Kotaku article that Jason Schreier wrote, he said that the BioWare employees were saying they weren't allowed, the upper ups weren't allowing them to utter the words Destiny in their presence.
Yeah.
And like, it's because, why? It's because they didn't want to be, it's almost like they were like, well, we didn't want to be seen as just chasing that trend. And chasing that, like, trying to make a game just like that. So they'll willfully ignore what Destiny is doing well and what Destiny is doing poorly, and just because they don't want to become seen as being a Destiny clone, even though their game ended up being unfavorably compared to Destiny anyways.
Yep.
Gearbox, similarly, it's like they never outright said they weren't going to make the game a games as a service, but they're straddling this weird line right now of like, oh, it's clearly not games as a service, but we're doing holiday-themed events that are going to go away after the end of the month.
Yep.
And we're introducing balancing to character. We're nerfing builds and we're buffing others. And we're removing... In a PvE, exactly. Like,
which is really weird.
Yeah, so it's like, they're nerfing loot, they're adjusting loot, they're adjusting things. Some hot fixes are reasonable because you need to fix the things that are broken, but others, balancing adjustments, like, that's very games as a service-y. I'm not necessarily complaining because some things in the game should be buffed, and you don't want to run into a situation like Borderlands 2 where you have these just obscenely broken builds that never get fixed.
Yep.
Or worse, you have these like builds that are things that are useless that never see buffs. But at the same time, it just seems weird that they're emphasizing that as opposed to... Yeah, when they've tried to seem to make it clear that they're not making a games as a service game, but it's like, what are you doing? Are you doing games as a service or are you not? Because a lot of the things you're doing seem to be games as a service-y.
Right.
So you seem to be chasing that trend without coming out right and saying that you're chasing that trend.
Yep.
So it's
then you just come across as like skeevy.
Yeah,
like,
it feels kind of skeevy. I feel kind of skeeved, and a lot of the player base do too. They're like, what? So like, because again, the Halloween events in past games have
been DLC drops.
Exactly,
and you can play them over and over again as much as you want.
In the middle of Easter, I can go play the Halloween DLC of Borderlands and have that experience. But now it's going to be a limited time event only for Halloween. Yeah. Probably come back every Halloween. You know what I mean?
Or something similar
with
to it.
With new changes to it. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of very GAS-y. Yeah, cool. Well, then that kind of leads us into the next question. When is it okay to copy trends versus buck up against them?
It's only okay to copy them if you can do something of your own flavor that is successful.
Yeah.
And we've talked about many examples that are doing that.
Yeah.
Western RPGs were copied, and now they're kind of mainstream. You have Horizon Zero Dawn, you've God of War, Breath of the Wild, the same games we keep beating that drum that they're so good because they've done this correctly. Yeah. That's when you do. That's what you do. Copy a trend, but you don't just copy a trend for copying a trend's sake.
Yeah.
Don't look over at your friends' test answers and just write them down. Like, think about what else is happening around you, but stand out.
To me, I'm coming back to this idea of what serves the game best.
Exactly.
What makes sense with the game. So things like trends in menu design, trends in quest design, trends in level layout. Those would have been good trends for Borderlands to follow.
Yep.
Trends in things like games as a service, loot boxes, microtransactions, limited times events. We'll see how they turn out, but those are the things that players didn't want them to follow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think of things like, other positive examples of like not like bucking up against trends or like reversing trends that you once followed. The recent announcement of The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah.
They said, so The Last of Us Part 1 had this weird multiplayer mode that I never touched, but I've heard it's actually kind of fun.
Yeah.
But I think back and I'm like, The Last of Us Part 1 came out when? 2009?
12?
Was it 12? Was it in the 2010s?
Yes.
But it was early 2010s.
It was right before the PlayStation 4 came out. PS4 came in 2013.
Yeah, it was right around the time and the generation where every game was expected to have a multiplayer mode. So that was a trend. They were like, well, we'll just shoehorn a multiplayer mode into the game, whether it makes sense or not.
Same with Uncharted. They did the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all Naughty Dog.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
a recent announcement was they're like, we're not doing factions. We like the idea of factions, but we're going to make another game that is this factions mode, is what they more or less said in their statement. That is an example of being like, yeah, that, now people recognize they're like, I don't want a shoehorn multiplayer mode in my single player game. Just give me the single player experience. And now Naughty Dog's like, yep, we're all about that. We're going to give you the single player experience, and then we're going to make another game with this multiplayer experience. We're going to take the good. Yeah, we're going to throw that in the bathwater and keep the baby, but put the baby in a new bathtub. And that's, that is going to be a completely separate game. So I think that's like an example of like a reverse of that, where they're like, or they see the good trend, which is people are more willing to accept just a single player experience without a shoehorned in multiplayer mode. And they're like, we're going into that. Yeah. Cause it serves our game. It serves our game better to not just try to shoehorn in something that doesn't belong. Right. And instead take the ideas from that and make a new game out of it. So it's like they're doing the best they can with limitations. So yeah, what serves the game? What does well? What's going to be the best choice for the game? I mean, the same thing can be said for innovation. Yeah. Don't innovate for the sake of innovating. Don't try to do something completely new.
I want to do something new. Oh, this is terrible.
I want to make the next big thing, and that it's just going to be. Sometimes it's just going to be bad. Right. Whereas, like, is this the best choice for the game? Is this the game you want to make? Sometimes you should consider, or developers should consider, I should say, if you have a great idea that doesn't work with a franchise, it doesn't mean the idea is bad. Make another game out of it. Yeah. Make a whole different game out of it. Right. It does again, this goes back to our philosophy on new IPs. Like, not every idea has to be crammed into an existing IP, because those existing IPs didn't used to exist, and it came into existence because it was a good idea that someone had. So like, take that idea, make a whole new game out of it.
And that's highlighting the risk of innovation. Is you have an existing franchise, consumers expect something of the same from the next entry in that franchise, but you don't want to be too samey either. Right. And I feel like
we're fickle. We're at the end of the day, we're fickle, and this whole conversation is a tightrope. This whole idea that we're talking about, and I don't envy, and I still sympathize that, like, developers, especially the designers, the top end game directors, have a very, very delicate line they have to walk. I don't envy you at all.
Like, one of the most interesting stories that I'm now thinking about with this entire conversation is Fortnite. Fortnite was touted as a build, a structure, and then shoot each other kind of arena shooter.
Yeah, kind of like
they completely pivoted in a very short amount of time the moment they saw PUBG's success with the whole Battle Royale, and have created one of the most successful video games ever known. Alongside of Minecraft. Fortnite,
it'll stand alongside Minecraft as the most successful games.
Fortnite's inspired by Minecraft with the building and the player versus player. So they went from copying trends of Minecraft to copying trends of PUBG, one being very popular and one being very new, and now created the most popular franchise ever. With that, now you have EA spinning off Apex Legends, which is kind of a new IP. It's in the Titanfall universe, but it's still new.
Sure.
That's a new IP.
Not enough people know Titanfall.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, that's the smart way to do it. Create a new game, put your Battle Royale mode there. But you also see Activision shoehorning Battle Royale into Call of Duty, and you see EA DICE shoehorning Battle Royale into Battlefield. And so that's a negative example of chasing trends. Do they need these Battle Royale modes across every game ever?
Yeah, there's a great quote in the book series that, and you've actually read this quote too, because I think it was at the end of Way of Kings in Stormlight Archive. But there was this quote about, like, what do people value the most? And one of the things that his answer was, people value, like, you have to be the first one, like the first one to come up with an idea. Because if it's like, even if two people simultaneously come up with the same idea, it's the first one to get it published. And then everybody else is going to be seen as chasing the trend. Now, I don't think that necessarily, I think that there is room for you to, again, Breath of the Wild was a success. Like, clearly they were chasing trends, but they were doing it in an interesting enough way that, like, so there is still room. I think developers shouldn't necessarily be afraid of that, because so many times it's like, okay, well, we were beat to that idea, so I guess we shouldn't do it. It's like, no, still, if it serves the game best, do it. But definitely, like, what you're describing is when developers are just like, oh, this is popular, this will make us money, let's throw it into the game, whether it makes sense to or not, as opposed to, why don't you come up with your own, like, why don't you come up with what best serves the franchise? But that just goes to show sometimes how vapid and shallow some franchises are and remain. Zelda did not innovate until it made sense to. Until they could find a game and a world and an idea that was worth serving it. Instead, they continue to preserve their game's identity throughout so many changes and so many new innovations to the third-person RPG.
Yeah.
And then finally they were like, cool, here's a new thing.
Yep, and it worked.
Yep.
Yeah. They even dabbled in the side-scroller.
And now I'm excited that they're going to be inspired by Red Dead Redemption for the Breath of the Wild 2. I wonder what elements of Red Dead Redemption are going to make their way into...
I bet it's hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet it's fishing.
I bet it's going to be a lot of the like NPC dynamics and interactions.
Maybe some
I bet because there's a lot of that. Like again, as you had fleshed out with, because Red Dead Redemption is a world that goes on around you whether you're interacting with it or not.
Yep.
And like so, just different people showing up, like different things. I think a lot of that element where it's like there's this sort of like NPCs are just going to end up like in spots and interact with each other, and then if you happen to be there to see it, cool, awesome, an event will unfold. If not, it still happens. Like I think that element might be. I hope. Gosh, that was one of the best.
World.
That was one of the best parts about Red Dead Redemption. Is you're like, oh, there's a stagecoach robbery that's happening. At least they create the illusion of like that probably would have happened whether you were there to see it or not. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, I digress.
Man, this conversation could go on for eons.
It is. It's a really interesting conversation. So we are happy to continue the conversation with you, listeners out there. Like, we want to hear from you in any of the avenues that Termite's about to describe. We want to hear from you what your thoughts are. What are games that should have innovated? What are games that should have innovated? And what are games that should have preserved instead of trying to innovate and do something new or chase trends?
Yeah. Easiest... Oh, what? And?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, the easiest way you can interact with us and the fastest way you can get there is through our Discord server, which has been standing up and catching some traction and getting some conversations flowing.
People's talkings.
Yeah, it's great. So interact with each other, interact with us as we jump in and out. But the Discord server link is in every episode description. I've tested it myself through Google Play and the Google Podcast app. You can see it there. You can see it on Facebook. So where can you find us outside of Discord? 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bit smash, 80bit podsmash.com, our landing website where we have links to Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or any other platform you would like through the RSS feed is all there for you. If you want us somewhere and we're not, please let us know. We'll put ourselves there. We're on all social media platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. We have our own subreddit as well. If you want to stand up a forum discussion about this, you can link it off to any other Reddit, any other subreddit. You can get the Reddit community involved as well. So hit us up. We want to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns. Be a part of the show. Corrections.
Yes, please. If we made an objectively wrong statement, then let us know.
I am brainstorming new ways to interact on Discord, such as letting everyone know when we're about to record, and maybe they could hit us up live in the show, and we could add that question right on in, and letting everyone know what our topics are going to be in advance, which Penguin has done. I'm also thinking about different channels. I added a beer channel where we'll post links to some of our beers that we're drinking. And talk
if there's
about
a beer that you want us to drink and talk about on the podcast,
request it through Discord.
Request it, and if we can get our hands on it, we will totally do that. Yeah,
so there's all kind of new ways we're trying to experiment and play with how can we grow our audience. Growing our audience is one thing, but increasing the quality with which we interact with you with current existing audience is more important to us.
Exactly. We'll have longer longevity.
Yeah.
If we can actually engage with you. So please.
Yep.
Don't be shy.
50 interacting people is way better than 1,000 vapid
hollow
touch and go.
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
So please interact with us and let us know everything.
If you are a vapid touch and go person too, that's fine. We're happy you're here.
The interaction is vapid, not the person. The people are not. Yeah, just want to clarify that.
We're just, if you don't feel like interacting, that's fine too. We are happy to just have you listen. So
please do.
And hope you enjoy our content. So anyways, we don't actually know what we're talking about next week because we have to have that conversation.
Yes, we do.
So we will just see you next week, and whatever we're talking about, it will probably be awesome.
Yep.
Or we'll hopefully be awesome.
See you next week.
Bye.